Hey, welcome back to the live stream of the 2016 General Conference of the Wesleyan Church. We are pleased to be joined by two of my good friends, Mark Benjamin and Matt Leroy. Mark Benjamin serves as the Director of NewRoom Conferencing and Resource Development. Matt is the pastor of Love Chapel Hill in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And they're both here to talk about Seedbed. So, Mark, right off the bat, what is Seedbed?
Yeah, seedbed, it's interesting. It comes from the Latin word. Seedbed itself comes from the Latin word seminarius, which actually means seedbed, right? So when you talk about seminary, the word itself means seedbed. And so where we got the idea seedbed is that you would plant yourself deeply in the soil of God and be formed by Him, right? So seedbed, we exist to gather, connect, and resource the global church to sow for a great awakening. And so we are all about resourcing people to be about that work in the local church.
I'm curious, I've seen the 7-minute seminary. Is that tied in with Seedbed as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we produce 7-minute seminaries. We do Bible studies. We publish books, and we have collectives of practitioners writing in all different areas. Each day we produce articles on Seedbed's website. And
a lot of really great Wesleyan-themed resources. I know, Matt, you're coming on board now to work with Mark. Dare I say, a friendship fort at Table Rock Wesleyan Camp.
That's right.
But Matt, talk about just that friendship, but talk about what it means to you as a lifelong Wesleyan to now be providing these resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is something that's grown out of friendship with Mark, and friendship with the guy who's over the visionary of this, which is J.D. Walt, mentor for both of us. And so part of what my role is going to be, and I'm really excited about, is to get back to some of that original Wesleyan genius of how do you organize around that original call of discipleship. And that's part of the genius of the Wesleyan movement. Yeah. Wesley said he was organizing to beat the devil, right? And so this part of that legacy that he left was the way that he didn't simply preach the gospel, but he repeatedly said, I won't preach the gospel anywhere that I can't follow it up with another blow, meaning to build that pathway of discipleship. And so that's part of what my role is going to be, is to help us dream and envision how we can actually organize around these ideas of the classes and the bands, which were so instrumental in it becoming a movement.
I ran across something. It was in my seminary days, and I have not been able to find it since, but some guy as a research project, had tried to determine how long is the average revival. So when there's a documented case, God begins to move in an extraordinary way. When did it start? When did it end? And in his research, he came up with the conclusion that a revival lasts about 6 months. Well, the Wesleyan revival lasted a half a century.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think this whole thing of discipleship, I think it is exactly. I mean, it was Whitfield on his deathbed acknowledged that my converts are like straw. I couldn't even tell you where they are.
Yeah.
And he realized the genius of Wesley in that it wasn't enough to make a profession of faith.
Yep.
We are about people who mimic the life of Christ.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we try to differentiate a little bit with. Really what you're talking about was a great awakening. Revivals tend to be, we need revivals, right? This is where the Spirit of God moves among people, where potentially lots of people get saved. We think about the Asbury revival back in 1970 at Asbury College.
Yeah.
I know people today who were influenced, came to Jesus as a result of that. We need revival. But when we talk about awakening, what we're actually talking about is a widespread move of God that affects the society and the culture. We're talking about prisons closing. We're talking about large amounts of people coming to faith, organizations getting started, schools being founded, the poor being taken care of. And so when we say we're sowing for a great awakening, what we're really after is not sort of just a little flash in the pan. We know we could never, ever manufacture the Spirit of God. We could never, just make awakening happen. That's why we say we're sowing for it. And one of the ways we do that is, we think, by creating resources for the local church
Yeah.
that help people grow as disciples,
Right.
but also call people to what we would say is a precursor to awakening and revival, and that would be travailing prayer. That sort of, as we look out over our country, as we look out over our world, and we see the pendulum of secularism swinging so far, that people, they say, you know, politics aren't really getting it done.
Yeah.
Local government's not really getting it done.
Newsflash.
Yeah.
Politics not getting
Right.
it done.
The local church, while we do good work, I mean, I've been a local church pastor for the past 7 years before I came on with Seedbed. For all of our labor, for all of our intense hard work, you often look out and you say, man, like I feel like people are just barely growing, but it's not the kind of formation that you really want to see in people's lives. And many of us are coming to the point where we say, unless God moves in a great way again,
Right.
nothing else can course correct sort of the trajectory that we're on.
Yeah.
One of the great things that I love about Seedbed is the NewRoom conference, which started 2 years ago. And for me, attending last year, it was just this eye-opening thing to see that this Wesleyan movement, and it is a movement, and it's bigger than the Wesleyan Church.
That's right.
It's bigger than the United Methodist Church.
Certainly.
But to see that there is just this hunger, there is this intense hunger, and you see it in our country, that there's a hunger amongst people for something deeper, for something more that they haven't been getting. And it's like, this is who we are. This is our message from the beginning.
Yep.
So, Mark, talk about the NewRoom conference. I know you just recently did a regional one in Atlanta. But how can people get connected with the NewRoom conference? And let me just say this, okay? I'm not a paid endorser. I have told multiple people this. If I could only go to one conference, and most of you know my wife's ill, I can't travel a lot, Seedbed, a NewRoom conference, that's the one conference I go to
you came back
every year.
last year. I mean, he told me as soon as you got back, said that's where we need to be.
Yeah,
So.
it's great stuff. So talk a little bit about the NewRoom conference.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Heath. You know, about 2 years ago, we decided we were going to put together this humble gathering of pastors and leaders and lay people, because what we were finding is with Seedbed, we're producing products, and we're producing products particularly around the theme of what we would call the second half of the gospel. And so we believe in the Wesleyan sort of tradition, justification and new birth, and the way that Wesley framed that for us, right? Justification is this work God does for us. New birth is this work God does in us. He adopts us as His sons and daughters. That often in the church, most of our resources and efforts are pointed towards conversions, and sort of getting people in the pews of a church. But we are really lacking oftentimes on the kinds of products and resources that help people move from that through what was really Wesley's heartbeat, growing to be perfected in love, growing in sanctification, right? Growing to that point where we have a profound love of God, we have profound love for others. And so we had these folks who were basically saying, like, are y'all ever going to do something where you gather together? And I don't know if you've noticed, but most people don't really want to belong to a publishing company. And Seedbed's more than a publishing company, but we had people saying, why don't you guys put these ideas in a community kind of format so we can talk about them, right? And so we just made this call. We called it NewRoom Conference because, I don't know if you know this, but sort of the genesis of the Wesleyan movement started at a little chapel in Bristol, England, that John Wesley named the NewRoom. And lots of preaching, lots of the sort of revival spirit spread from that place forward. So we're not trying to recreate what happened in the past. We're basically saying we come from the greatest missional movement on the face of the planet. The Methodists, Wesleyans planted a church in every county in the entire United States. We've never done anything like that before or since. And we believe that we have one of the greatest Wesleyan disciple-making sort of systems in Wesley. And so what we did is we basically said, all right, y'all come, we're going to host this little conference, and we had a few maybe bigger name speakers like an Ed Stetzer or an Alan Hirsch, but by and large, we were bringing together unknown Wesleyan people that we think are champions of the faith, who have dug deep wells in scholarship, people that are doing stuff in other parts of the world. We had 230 people come. And it was almost for us, because we threw the thing together. For us, we sat back and we were like, man, what is happening here? And what we sensed in our own spirit was that God was sort of healing and renewing our sense that, man, like, you know how often you have like your head hung low in the local church? You're like, man, this is hard work.
Slog.
I feel like I'm on like a, in the sort of Methodist world, a lot of Methodists, United Methodists, feel like they're on a sinking ship.
Yeah. No.
I see the numbers of what's going on in the Wesleyan Church. I'm ordained Wesleyan. I'm super encouraged about what's going on in the Wesleyan Church. Yeah. That's not the case for a lot of Methodists or capital W Wesleyans. Right. We're on decline, right? Yeah. And so there was this real encouragement, this sense of like, man, we got to come together on this. And so NewRoom's goal is to bring together the global tribe of Wesleyans, right? That we might get our hearts and minds focused on what it's all about. And so we've made inroads with Salvation Army and Nazarene, Free Methodist, Vineyard folks, Anglican folks who are discovering that they're actually far more Wesleyan than they knew. And of course, we've had it from the very beginning, a strong connection with the Wesleyan Church, and love what y'all are doing. Followed up that year that you came, Heath, was 2015. We thought, man, if we could get 600 people here, it would be amazing. We sold out. We had 730, I think. Yeah. And this year, we already have 800 registrations. Wow. Yeah. We anticipate we're going to have over 1,400 people gathered at it. One of the things I'm most excited about this year, we sort of think of the pinnacle of what we're going to do together is actually going to be a night of intercession and worship on Thursday night. Yeah. We have this guy, Pete Gregg, coming. He's from the UK, and he started the 24/7 prayer movement, wrote the book Red Moon Rising way back. Well, they've been on this journey of calling communities to prayer for years, right. Over a decade. Well, recently, the Catholic cathedrals in Europe have opened up the doors to Pete Gregg and their organization to host these nights of intercession and prayer. Wow. And they're particularly often doing it on Pentecost, on the evening of nice. Pentecost. Right. And they're gathering together thousands of hungry people in post-Christian Europe who are asking for an outpouring of God. So there's this inkling that God is actually beginning to do some great work in Europe. We've been super encouraged by that, because oftentimes we feel like maybe we're just a little bit behind that post-Christian kind of world. So on this Thursday night, we are calling together the whole community in this night of intercession and worship, and we're going to go through these different movements. We're going to hear from people like Danielle Strickland about human trafficking, not as a sort of, hey, get you informed, but as an exhortation. We're calling the church to pray for this issue because it's one of the most profound challenges that we face in the world. And so we're going to hear from folks from Nigeria, Liberia. We're going to hear from the global church, hear about what's going on in the global south and east, and we're going to pray, and we're going to ask God to move in our midst. So we're super excited about it.
A couple things. We paid attention a little bit to the United Methodist General Conference. What was that, 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I kind of watched Timothy Tennant, followed him a little bit and stuff he had to write. And so the day after the General Conference, he talked about the NewRoom Conference. And you could tell there, a lot of conservatives, especially in the United Methodist Church, were pretty discouraged coming out of that. And, he said, listen, and he was just calling everyone to the NewRoom Conference. He said, we're not going to talk about schism. That's not going to be our focus. Right. These things are not going to be our issues. We're going to talk about Wesley and our heritage and getting back to the very things that you've said. One of the things I love about this, too, let me go back to discipleship. I think of Willow Creek and Bill Hybels and his courage when the reveal came out, and he just was dead honest. We're not doing what we said we're supposed to do. And then I've come in contact with Renovation of the Church by Kent Carlson. And it's a great story. I mean, he started this church out, and he was part of the Willow Creek Association. They started 80 people, grew all the way up to 1,800, and then they went and heard Dallas Willard. And they took their staff, and they were on retreat with Dallas Willard. And Kent Carlson and Mike Lucan, they were co-pastoring, and when they looked at each other and said, oh, my word, we've been attracting people, but we're not making apprentices for Jesus here. That book is about their 10-year journey where, I mean, their attendance fluctuated, and but it's a great story about discipleship and the beauty of Seedbed, the NewRoom conference. I mean, returning to very Wesleyan themes. Why does Christ redeem us? His every intention is to do something with us once he redeems us. It is to form us in his image.
Yeah.
And also in forming us in his image, putting us on mission for him, that we might join him in his heart for what he wants to do in other people's lives.
I've given this quote, I don't know how many times in the last month or two, but there's a historian, Edwin Malden, he writes about Wesley, and he said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, Wesley discovered the poor, but then he said he certainly was the first great friend of the poor. So it's this idea of holiness that, and I love Joanne Lyon in that I was asked last night, what will be her legacy? And I said, I think her legacy will be that the history will say of her that she tied us back to our history.
Yes. One thing on that real quick. One of the things I love most about that is I love the focus of the Wesleyan movement and the service to the poor. But the other part of it and the beauty of the movement and the ramifications of it is that it wasn't just a ministry to the poor, it became a ministry by the poor. And unlikely voices were drawn in and found places not just to be served, but to take leadership for the first time in their lives. And so I think that's part of that great legacy of that.
I think, part of our Wesleyan heritage, if you look at Wesley, he was a risk taker. Because he empowered people that society had just overlooked.
Absolutely.
And Wesley's like, well, this guy's going to be one of the leaders. Like, whoa.
Yes.
He has
Jesus' his announcement of his ministry and the inauguration of his ministry in Luke chapter 4, quoting Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And so, not to cut you off, but I think that for all of us as churches and as individual Christians, this is something that the Holy Spirit's been convicting me on strongly lately. Is your life good news to the poor? And is your church good news to the poor? And if you can't answer that, then something's out of alignment, and we've got to get back on alignment. That's not just Wesley; that's all the way back, to Jesus, and that's at the core of his ministry.
So, Matt, how does an event like this, General Conference, you're a lifelong Wesleyan, you've been to lots of these, but as a local church pastor, how do you capture the spirit of what's going on here and take it back home to Chapel Hill?
Wow. That is a great question. I wept through that service this morning, dude. I just cried through that thing, and the beauty of being a part of this global family and of what the Holy Spirit is bringing about or all around the world. I was just so moved by that, and just sitting there thinking, can we be one of those churches? Can I ask my people, will you give $21 more a year so that we can double the amount of missionaries that we'll send? Can we as a church give $2,000 more? For us, and in our scenario, we are deeply involved with the poor, and that's a big step. Doesn't sound like that much money, but it's a big. And can we do that? And so, I think just seeing that broader picture, that we're a part of a family that supports each other, that loves each other, and we are a part of something that is significant that God is doing in the world. And I feel like we are just on the front edge of what He's wanting to do, and something is stirring and moving. And that's what I go back with, is the reminder we're part of a family, something so much bigger than ourselves, and yet, even though we're a little corner, we've got a big part that we can play in it.
I would say on that front as well that what we're finding in NewRoom and Seedbed is with what's going on in the global South and the global East, that God is doing fresh work, that lots of people are getting saved, and the church is growing in other parts of the world that we often don't see. And one of the things we're trying to do is actually bring leaders from those parts of the world to come and teach us
Yeah.
at NewRoom, because for so long in the West, we have felt like we are the idea leaders, and we are the thought leaders, and we're the ones that are going to influence, and we're going to send missionaries. Well, one of the greatest mission sending countries now in the world is Nigeria, right? Going and reaching other parts of the world as a missions sending country, and we often don't think about that. And so what this morning at this conference reminded me of as well is just how much we have to learn from the people that are witnessing and experiencing these movements of God in other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Mark, where can people, we've been talking about Seedbed, where can people go to connect with Seedbed online, follow them on Twitter, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so seedbed.com is the easiest way to get to us. NewRoomConference.com is another way you can go there to register for the conference. And gosh, I wish I had it with me. We have a promo code that we're giving to Wesleyans. I think it's Wesleyan General Conference. It's WGC 2016. So any Wesleyan that wants to come to the conference can get $80 off registration. It ends up being $99.
Nice.
So WGC 2016 is what you would enter in the promo code box to register, and that's a Wesleyan only discount. That's because we know that Wesleyans are sometimes a little bit frugal. They like discounts.
Well, I'm trying to talk some of these guys into going to the conference with me. I had a blast last year, and there was a lot of Wesleyans there. Matt, where can people go if they want to connect with you online, on Twitter, and all the rest?
Yeah. So first of all, lovechapelhill.com. So get to be the pastor of this eclectic church plant downtown Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So that would be great. And at Love Chapel Hill for Twitter and Instagram, and then at Matt Leroy for Twitter and Instagram.
Awesome.
So, just so everybody knows, everybody watching the live stream, the convention center is technically closed this afternoon. So we are having to negotiate with some of our guests this afternoon. So if we're not exactly on the schedule, or if we miss somebody, send your letters to the editor or whatever.
So this is a bootleg.
Nice.
Yes.
We're filming from Joanne Lyon's suite right now.
Hey, listen, our next guest is over there waiting for us. So let's.
We're excited to have him. So if you'll stick around just a few minutes, it was great to have Mark and Matt.
Thank you.
We're getting ready to interview Pastor Ed Love. So just give us just a few moments.